What is the difference between a complete and total understanding of the brain's neural process for eliciting the colour red and the experience of the colour red? Or what about our experience of something like morality, music, love, or, as only the Germans could put it, the feeling of Abgrundanziehung, the overwhelming need to look into the abyss? Can an understanding of neural activity give us all that we need to explain what experience is? And if not, how much more can the hows of this physicalist philosophy teach us? In recent decades, there has been a growing case for the theory of quantized gravity, the idea that space and time are digitized. Here, we may pass beyond the scale of space and time itself, into the next perspective of this infinite flux. Time would, therefore, have an emergent nature, not too dissimilar from how our fluid consciousness emerges from the quantized firing of neurons, or how a wave upon the ocean emerges from the molecular connectivity of water molecules. But what I feel that these and all other examples of emergence share is a quality of perspective, highlighted by the fact that emergent properties are not secondary to their more elementary parts, at least not in any ultimate sense. So let us take a deeper look into this phenomena we call emergence, and see if a deeper knowledge of its hows can't offer some insight into this ever-shifting theory of self.
Good morrow, fellow humans. My name is Sean and I am obsessed with infinity. So join me as I attempt to unpick the infinity of what is.
So, yes, a wave emerges from the molecular connectivity of water molecules, and as such, the wave's behaviour is in many ways determined by the character of its molecules. But so is the collective behaviour of the molecules determined by the nature of the wave and its surrounding environment, i.e. the water. The point is that influence passes both ways. But the reason why we tend to presume a strictly bottom-up hierarchy is because, well, you can't have water or waves without water molecules, whereas you can have water molecules independent of water. And that seems reasonable at first glance. However, there is another way to look at this picture. Because we can't have a wave without both water molecules and water. So what does this say about the assumed hierarchy? When we consider the wave uniquely and its shared bottom-up, top-down framework, we can see how it attains its unique identity. Firstly, we notice that the wave clearly isn't synonymous with either water or water molecules, because it's the wave, hence the name. Plus, as said, the wave has a unique influence over both environments in how its nature dictates their movement. But though the wave, as an ontological structure, is full of its own character, and so in that sense independent, we are also forced to acknowledge that there is nothing other than these two classes of environment, inner and outer, and their relationships in all that we call a wave. The wave doesn't exist on its own. And so it's therefore clear that this particular relationship, named the wave, only attains an identity from within a perspective that explicates it from the unity and activity of the whole. From one perspective, it is itself just the wave. Whereas from another, it's just the behaviour of the molecules, or equally, the behaviour of the water. But isn't that also curious? How some attribute, the wave, could be the behaviour of two different classes of things uniquely. How it could be the behaviour of both the water and of the water molecules. The reason for this is not simply because the water and its molecules are in fact the same thing, because ultimately they're not. Once again, water and water molecules are not synonymous with one another, as they each have their own characteristics and identity, both of which hold a particular influence over the other and their shared environments. The reason why they can share the same wave as a characteristic of their independent nature is because neither the water nor the molecules have an identity that is any more ultimate than the wave's identity, as they too are merely the characteristics of some other broader system. Like the wave, for the water to exist, we must presume its inner and outer environment, i.e., the molecules in the planet's atmosphere. From one perspective, water is undeniably just water. And yet from another, water, like the wave, is nothing other than the behaviour of the molecules, or the behaviour of the atmospheres. A relationship held between two straddling environments. Water is the crosstalk between the molecular world and the greater atmosphere, in just the same way that the wave was only the crosstalk between molecules and water. Neither exist as entities in and of themselves. Now, this may all sound like superfluous verbiage, but we could have just as easily gone in the opposite direction, towards the inner environment, and appreciated the molecules as nothing other than an overlapping of related environments, this time between the atoms and their broader microscopic world. If we remember, the reason for the assumed bottom-up hierarchy was that we could have a molecule independent of the water. But again, there is nothing other than the behaviour of atoms and their relationships with other local atoms in all that we call molecule. Molecule is just another class of relationship, something that has influence and identity within a certain perspective, but is nonetheless devoid of any unique substance. How it gets explicated from the activity of the whole depends on how strongly a certain perspective focuses on its characteristics over another. And this is an unfolding that happens ad infinitum. In fact, simplifying any unique identity down to the relations of just two environments is itself a gross simplification. It's also a subjective pluralizing. In actuality, any identifiable entity can either be considered the crosstalk of a seemingly infinite number of environments, or just the one. Everything is the emergent characteristic of everything else. Which only goes to show that what might seem digital in one perspective shall be the basis for what appears analog in another, with influence always passing in both directions. In a similar fashion, the digital behaviour of neurons might affect the analog experience, but so will that experience dictate the behaviour of the neurons. Though a neurobiologist may be able to describe the digital neuronal algorithm that corresponds to the feeling of Abgrundanziehung, how we experience it is as a continuous process. We need only to think about our experience of music to see how we conjure a living moment. And yet, it is this experience that dictates which neuronal algorithm shall be the next to follow. Even Wheeler himself recognized this duality of perspective-oriented relationships, stating, quote, "Space-time tells matter how to move. matter tells space-time how to curve. Two sides of one coin. The point that we've already begun to unpick is that emergence is rarely the unidirectional evolution of states that we tend to envision, with more fundamental structures giving rise to higher orders of complexity. Instead, new relationships attain a particular power of influence at the cross-sections of overlapping environments, which, from some broader perspective, are always and ultimately one and the same environment. Again, two sides of one coin. So though this may appear entirely obvious when considered in bite-sized chunks, the greater picture is not a simple one to hold on to. And so we shall have to unfold it in more detail across later chapters. But for now, in terms of emergent time, let us keep it in mind so we can attribute a context to claims like time emerges from the quanta of space. Because emergence is never a one-way street. Of course, there is always the obvious alternative to quantized spacetime, which is an infinitely divisible spacetime. But for our discussion, I don't feel that this really changes things, as it would only remove another flip side. It may remove our ability to measure a distinction between certain spatio-temporal relations at the Planck scale, but it doesn't deny the potential for an endless variety of states. Rules of nature would inevitably have to change as we continue down this ravine of infinite divisibility. If time is to be considered as malleable as suggested by relativity, stopping at the speed of light or flipping beneath the horizons of black holes, then there's no telling what an infinite division could bring. So, whether quantized at the Planck scale or warping into endless miniaturization, I feel that this is only ever a discussion about whether we will have the ability to identify these variants, these dualities of time. But the problem we are trying to untangle is what impact do these theories of time have on our understanding of self, the experiencer, bound to the physical, changing through time. As discussed, time is not universal. Your time is different to my time. Time is a web that warps and stretches depending on the location and speed of the observer. Our current description of reality above the Planck length is one of constant movement, all aspects of the universe existing at varying degrees of unrest, unceasingly moving through time towards entropy. Two perspectives from within this universe can be measured as moving in either space or time relative to one another, but not relative to some ultimate background of either an infinite space-time or even an infinite that surpasses space-time. But there was a key word in that sentence: measured. When we measure, we cannot avoid containing our descriptions to the finite. This is that quality of perspective so characteristic of emergence. The experience itself is a measurement. Being contained to a spatio-temporal mind, everything we can know in measurement will be finite. And a finite measurement, a finite experience, can never entirely comprehend its own infinity. The above described quanta of time, of space, of energy, and of mass could, if proven, be used to satisfactorily describe a quanta of self, a description of the physical self in its measurable totality, the entire finite collection of Planck-sized bits that our existence has, does, and ever will fill. But even if we do choose to look at the information in this way, we can still appreciate it from two conflicting perspectives, two sides of the single coin. Above the limits of the Planck length, where each quantum of space-time is finite, measurable and seemingly independent from the whole, and below the Planck length, where this independence has no meaning or actuality, where we can only imagine a fog of interplay outside of space and time, where there is no here or there, no now or then, a unified, interconnected oneness. But regardless of which frame your perspective wishes to highlight, our independent experience, that which exists within space-time, and that which is at the core of our description of self, is as unique and whole as it is one with this infinite unity that encompasses it. Like our description of the infinitely large and the infinitely small in the very first chapter, these are not two separate realities. They are just two varied perspectives of the same unified whole. Again, we don't have the below Planck scrambling on the left and space-time on the right. These are the exact same space, only viewed through different eyes. So, the self that we first identified in the brain has yet to be refuted. The self is still the experience with all its finite restrictions of perspective, as it is also the physical, with all its limitations of physical reality. But equally behind our perception are these interpretations of self at one with all reality in their superposition of the infinite. The experience, it seems, is a finite attempt to describe this infinity of self. As Protagoras wrote, "Man is the measure of all things." Before I asked, are we the algorithm of the brain? Or are we the idea that arises from the algorithm? We are both, as both are finite descriptions, correct, yet infinitely incomplete. If you're new to the channel and want to see why we're talking about what we're talking about, what the history of this channel has been, please go over to the channel, check it out, look at the playlists, and if you want to just see the next episode, it's going to be live up here in this corner as soon as it does go live in a week's time from today. And here is just a fun little episode I think you'll like. Alright, click on it, it all helps. See you later, bye!